Hello, in this discussion, we are going to examine how states develop nuclear weapons. So this is distinct from the previous literature that looked at why states develop nuclear weapons. Most of the literature is about why. And that is the first question that we want to ask, but this investigates how. That there are different methods and approaches to achieving nuclear proliferation. This particular article introduces 4 different approaches to developing nuclear weapons: hedging, sprinting, hiding, and sheltered pursuit. I think it's an excellent article and it's highly approachable. What we want to pull from this particular article is the strategy, the example, and the data use. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the literature in this particular article, some of the data analysis, and then just leave it open to the hedging strategies because the hedging strategies themselves are well defined. There's a case study or two for each strategy. So we really just want to make sure we get the theory and the literature down. The literature focuses on why. This is an excellent piece in establishing blocks of literature, just like the Horowitz piece that we've discussed in other contexts, in identifying blocks of literature. We think about binary proliferation. What we mean here is, do they have weapons or do they not? And that, obviously, both with this article and other readings from the sections, doesn't fully capture the dynamics in proliferation. Right? We care about states like Iran that doesn't have a nuclear weapon, but is potentially moving with capability. What's their intent? How are they going to respond? What's their ultimate objectives? Most of the political science literature tells us why they might pursue a nuclear weapon, but not how. Well, the how question would help inform what we understand from Iran. So there's 2 literature assumptions that this article attacks or tries to undermine. First is that all states pursue nuclear weapons. They seek to weaponize capability. Right? The examples: South Korea, Japan, Iran potentially, depending on the argument. They develop capability, but they don't try to weaponize it. They could, under the right circumstances, but they choose not to. Well, most of the literature assumes if you're developing any kind of nuclear capability, you're developing a nuclear weapon. Here's why. The next is that states seek to develop the capability as quickly as possible. That also doesn't fit the historic narrative. Many states simply go about it slowly. Now, as we've explored in other contexts, the proliferation argument that Horowitz first investigates is that there's learning that goes on in nuclear material or nuclear handling of nuclear weapons, nuclear processes. What this figure is showing us is the propensity for conflict, for a militarized interstate dispute, based on the years of nuclear acquisition. So the close 0 being when you acquire a nuclear weapon. And what this is showing us is that as you start to approach a nuclear weapon, there's actually an increase in the likelihood of conflict until you reach a nuclear weapon, and then there's a slow decline. Right? That's what you see with that smoothing curve in between, in the solid smoothing line curve. So over the time periods of 20 years, plus or minus nuclear acquisition, there is a statistically significant effect on conflict behavior. Right? And so what this tells us is that how states pursue nuclear weapons, so the negative 20 to 0 year mark, right, how you're developing nuclear weapons, tells us something about the overall conflict and conflict activities. Now, I'm not going to go through the 4 strategies. I expect you to read the article and pull them out. They're very straightforward. I do want to articulate the theory behind it. This flowchart shows you what good science is, because you can explain this very quickly to anyone. So on the bottom, you have the circles are all the hedging strategies, or not hedging, but all the acquisition approaches. There are 3 types of hedging strategies. Then there's sprinting, hiding, and sheltered pursuit. So those, remember, are the hows of proliferation. And then each of the boxes that lead to that in the decision tree tell us a key variable that we want to investigate. Are you facing an acute security threat? Well, if you're not, you can do technical hedging. Do you have security guarantees? Do you have domestic consensus? Vulnerability to military economic prevention? And then finally, what's the role of a major power? So answering each one of those effects gives you a different outcome in the decision tree. And also look, each of them is exclusive. All right, there's not multiple shared outcomes for the decision-making process. So if we see a state pursuing this particular type of strategy, it then gets set. It can then fall back into saying, this is what probably set up the overall strategy. All right, so this is discussion question 8. Which proliferation strategy is most challenging for U.S. policy to thwart and why? So he will tell you in the article, he says, hiding just doesn't work. But I want you to wrestle with this. Which of those is going to be the most difficult to circumvent or to identify? And the reason why I want you to think about that is think about states around the world that may not have been identified as nuclear capable or nuclear powers, but participated in the AQCon network or conducted some kind of other clandestine pursuit. Now, maybe the U.S. intelligence community knew about it, but the public didn't. So just think about that. Base it on the reading. So he tells you what he thinks, and you're welcome to engage what he argues. So with that, it's a very short summary, but it's an excellent article. Make sure you know all 4 hedging strategies and have an example for each of the 4. Thanks.